السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll go through the last verse in Surah As-Saff, the last verse in Surah As-Saff, verse number 14. Repeat after me, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا أنصار الله كما قال عيسى بن مريم للحواريين من أنصاري إلى الله قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفرت طائفة فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. So here this ayah, يا أيها الذين آمنوا, 4 to 5 counts. كونوا, again مد, كونوا أو أنصارا. The noon سكون after it صاد is تنوين إخفاء with heavy. كما قال عيسى بن مريم, كما قال عيسى بن مريم, the باء with سكون قلقلة. للحواريين شدة. من أنصاري, من أو إخفاء, من أنصاري مد إلى الله. قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله. فآمنت طا, the ta is not to be said, you go straight to the ta. فآمنت, right? فآمنت طا, and then the mad طائفة, tanween after it, meme is idgham with a tone. من بني, noon after it, باء اقلب meme sound, and then the mad من بني إسرائيل for the 5 counts. وكفرت طائفة, the same thing. وكفرت, you go straight to the ta. Ta and ta, the ta is with sukun, then you go straight to the ta. فأيدنا, the dal with سكون قلقلة. فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. فأصبحوا ظاهرين. The translation of the ayah: O you have believed, be supporters of Allah, as when Isa the son of Mary said to the disciples, who are my supporters for Allah? The disciples said, we are supporters of Allah, and a faction of the children of Israel believed and a faction disbelieved. So we supported those who believed against their enemy, and they became dominant. So this ayah, the last ayah in the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling the believers. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu. What is the command here from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Kunu ansar Allah. Be ansar Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be the ansar of Allah. Ansar, comes from nasara, victory, help. Be the ones or support, be the supporters of Allah. What is the meaning of that? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most rich, He doesn't need anyone. Everybody is in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what it means is that you are upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala superior, and to make the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala victorious. Right? So to be ansar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of their affairs, as Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he said, بأقوالهم, in your speech, you're supporting the deen of Allah. You're establishing the deen of Allah in your speech, in your actions, in yourself, in your wealth. We don't do anything except by the permission of Allah, by being obedient to Allah. Kunu ansar, and this is a command that needs to be reflected upon, on how to apply this in one's life. And the same thing Imam As-Sa'di rahimahullah, he said, Kunu ansar Allah, with your speech and actions, by being upon the deen of Allah and having this eagerness to establish it over anything else, and to struggle and to strive to achieve this in yourself and those who are around you. Right? And otherwise, if a person is not like this, he is then supporting the evil by committing the evil. Right? So supporting something is not just by giving, say, sometimes money to support a cause. This is one of the forms of it. But also you can support good or evil by your speech. And you see that clearly if someone's supporting a cause, for example, by his speech, by sharing something. And nowadays there are more actions that is done without even saying anything, by the touch of one's finger, right? So, and with one's speech and one's actions. And supporting the deen of Allah is by being obedient to Allah. When we are establishing the deen of Allah to whatever in our capacity, that means we are Ansarullah. So this is the meaning of Kunu Ansar Allah. Be the ones that give victory to the deen of Allah. And this is a great honor to be Ansarullah. Right? And to be Ansarullah, to be those who support the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to be upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the best of all of the people that supported the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the companions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So, Kunu Ansar Allah. So this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's related also to the tijara, or the trade that is mentioned earlier, which is to believe in Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or to jahiduna fi sabilillah, and to struggle for the sake of Allah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make it even easier for the believers, to get them more encouraged to be Ansarullah, He said, as Isa alayhi salam, the son of Mary, said to the Hawariyin, to the disciples, the closest people, the companions of Isa alayhi salam, he said to them, Man ansari ilallah, who would be ansari to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who would give me victory for the sake of Allah, when the believers were weak and oppressed and the evil ones are going after them. So he said that to them. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ حَوَارِيٍّ وَحَوَارِيِّ الزُّبَيْرِ. For every prophet, there's disciples, and my disciples are Zubayr, right? Al-Hawari, the closest ones to the person. So he said to them, who is my Ansar, those who would support me for the sake of Allah? قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله. The Hawariyin, they said, we are Ansar of Allah, those who would give support to the deen of Allah and the cause of Allah by being upon the deen of Allah and spread it and do whatever it takes, whatever the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then, فَآمَنَتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّن بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل, a group, طائفة from the people of Bani Israel, they believed, وَكَفَرَتْ طَائِفَةٌ, and a group disbelieved. فَأَيَّدْنَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا عَلَىٰ عَدُوِّهِمْ فَأَصْبَحُوا ظَاهِرِينَ. We supported, فَأَيَّدْنَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believed, عَلَىٰ عَدُوِّهِمْ, against their enemies, فَأَصْبَحُوا ظَاهِرِينَ, they became victorious, they defeated their enemies. So this ayah is basically encouraging and commanding the believers to give victory to the deen and to make the jihad against those who oppose the deen, the truth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided the companions radiallahu anhum to observe this in the most perfect way. And this is always true at all times. If people are weak and oppressed, is by applying the deen of Allah, by doing whatever in their capacity to be upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to remember what happened to the messengers of Allah, the prophets of Allah, and one of which Isa alayhi salam, how he said to his people, to his disciples, who would be Ansari ilallah, and how the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, the companions radiallahu anhum, they give the best example to this. Imam As-Sa'di rahimahullah, since we're going through the benefits of what's mentioned in his Tafseer, as we heard, Ansar Allah, to be Ansar Allah, that means to give victory to the truth and don't give victory to the falsehood by your speech and actions, and you're applying the deen of Allah. And one of the forms of it, if you really, a person would say, how can I do that in the times that we live in? One of the very obvious and clear one is when we look around us and we look at the status of the human beings on the face of earth. We are in the most misinformed era of all times, opposite to what people might think, that there's so much information out there. People are so deceived and misinformed, and they don't know the reality, many of them, of the deen of Islam. Not just the non-Muslims, but also Muslims. Many of the Muslims today, they do not know the deen of Islam, either by their actions or by their speech. So one of the ways to give victory to the deen of Allah is to learn the deen of Allah and to be firm upon it and to teach it to others. As he says, Imam Sa'di rahimahullah, وَمِن نَصْرِ دِينِ اللَّهِ تَعَلُّمْ كتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, to learn the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, and to enjoin what is good and to forbid what is evil. And from the victory of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is at your home, in your possessions, and the things that you have authority over. And to give the world the best example in one's conduct and one's speech and one's actions by following the way of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. And imagine, how Isa alayhi salam said that to the people, to the Hawariyin, how he said to them, Man ansari ila Allah, who would help me for the sake of Allah? Go with me to support me with the deen of Allah. The Hawariyun, the disciples, they immediately said, Nahnu ansarullah. So as a result of that, by the call of Isa alayhi salam, a group believed, a group disbelieved. So who won at the end? Who was victorious at the end? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave victory to those who believed. And where are the ummah of the Muslimin, of this ummah, the Muslims, when it comes to giving support to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? Are we like the disciples of Isa alayhi salam to give victory to the deen of Allah? But again, al-Hawariyun are the special ones among the messengers of Allah. And how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they gave the perfect example in this. They would support the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and put him forward before their own selves and their families and things like this, all because of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, man ansari ila Allah, when he said, who would give me victory, to give victory to the deen of Allah. Isa alayhi salam was not going after his own glory or own desire. It's all about the deen of Allah. That's why when the ulama, they say, as Qatada rahimahullah, he said in the meaning of this, he said, قَدْ كَانَتْ لِلَّهِ أَنصَارٌ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ تُجَاهِدُ عَلَى كِتَابِهِ وَحَقِّهِ. That it was upon this ummah, those who give victory to the deen of Islam, striving for the sake of Allah upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they gave pledge to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum, when they gave pledge to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in Bay'atul Aqaba, for example, they were giving the pledge to the Prophet ﷺ to give victory to the deen of Islam, knowing of what they are basically setting themselves for. As it's mentioned in some of the narrations, when one of them, he said to them, do you know what you're about to do, O people of Al-Ansar? You know that you're basically opposing the entire Arab, right? They were so outnumbered at that time. You're opposing everyone else. And the swords would, حَتَّى تَعُضَّكُمُ السُّيُوفُ, the swords will bite you. You're going into a very dangerous state. But they went forward and they gave the pledge to the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose them to be the best of all of the people because of the sacrifice that they went through. And this is how the believers they are when it comes to the deen of Allah. When it comes to the deen of Islam, they give everything for the sake of Allah. Their concern, their most important thing in their life is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we look at the ayat, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kunu bi, right? From kana yakun, ansar, helpers, from nasara. From an-nasr is the victory, help. Nasrun min Allah wa fathun qareeb. And to give victory, it doesn't have to be just physical matter. To give help with whatever means that a person can have in this life. Kunu ansar Allah, and what an honor to be of ansar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kama, the same or the like, kama qala Isa ibn Maryam, as Isa ibn Maryam, the son of Maryam, he said, alayhi salam, lil Hawariyun, to the disciples from Ha, Waw, Ra, right? And these are the special of those who are close to him. And al-Hawariyin, actually, the word al-Hawariyin comes from Ha, Waw, Ra, right? And Hur, and it's comes really like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّهُ ظَنَّ أَن لَن يَحُورَ, that the disbeliever, he thought that he's not going to yahur, that means he's not going to be resurrected. And it really comes from going back and forth in one's opinion, one's statements, things like this. And this is where originally it comes from, right? And that's what al-Hawariyin here, those who, they're supporters, of course, and those who give victory to the deen of Allah, the disciples of a person. There might be, when people they reach that state, they might have to think about it first, and then they would be among the closest. So he said to the Hawariyin, Man Ansari, who is my helpers, from Nasara, to give Nasr again, ilallah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is my Ansar, my helpers. قال الحواريون, the Hawariyin, they said, نحن أنصار الله. فآمنت طائفة, so believed a طائفة. طائفة is a group, from ta, waw, fa. And tawaf, when you go around something, so a طائفة is the group of people. فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفر الطائفة, and disbelieved another group. فأيدنا, we give victory. فأيدنا الذين آمنوا. فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم. That means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave help and victory. And أيدنا from alif ya dal. Al-aid is the quwwah, is the strength. فأصبحوا ظاهرين, they became apparent. Of course, the benefit in these verses are very clear. The command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the believers to support the truth and to be upon the truth and to fulfill the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's really requires for us to reflect. And, there are general things that everybody should be upon. And there are things that we find yourself tested when it comes to giving victory to the deen of Allah in specific situations, and in being upon the truth. And when at times of fitan, sometimes a person, he would be in a situation where it's either or. Either a person would support the truth, or he would do something to support evil. So for no doubt that it's an obligation not to support the evil. So how to protect oneself from supporting the evil? By supporting the truth, and one of which is to learn the deen of Allah and to be upon it, and to seek rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to go through the surah and to reflect upon it, and to try to take the benefits from these verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it very clear for the believers of how to be steadfast upon the deen of Allah, and how to give victory to the deen of Allah. And whatever actions that you do on a daily basis, this is how you give victory to the deen of Allah, because it's how the victory of Allah physically comes in this life. When you establish the salah, when you give the zakah, when you raise your children, when a wife is obedient to her husband and living with goodness with him, when the husband is steadfast and fearing Allah and bringing halal to his household and being kind to his family, this is all part of being ansar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the believers are steadfast upon the deen of Allah, to witness that in one's heart. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us understanding of that. And tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala, we'll talk about some of the benefits that we learned from the surah. And hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, we have it also memorized. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.